When did Meghan Markle's role on Suits stop being a job and start being a brand? We have the evidence in the form of comments about her character on the show land like personal attacks. The plot is changed to match her needs, and suddenly the writer's room is doing image management. That's narrative control. It pairs with something bigger, role enmeshment, when a character or the person most admired at the moment fuses with the narcissist so tightly that praise feels like oxygen and critique feels like a wound. The optics are data and the pattern is the point. If you've ever had a relationship where the narrative is more important than the truth, you'll spot this instantly. Let's roll the receipts, but before we begin, here's the intro. Welcome to Revealing the Narc. Join me as I highlight narcissistic traits in celebrities and public figures. Everything here is in my opinion and not professional advice. If you enjoy the analysis, please like and subscribe. The article I want to go through today is titled, Meghan Markle Placed Status Above Reality and Struggled to Separate Her Own Image from Suits Character, claims royal author as Season 2 of With Love Meghan is set to be released. This is a topic that's actually quite interesting to me because I've noticed that Meghan has certain ideas about how things should look. For example, there's a uniform for what to wear during humanitarian work, which seems to be cosplaying Angelina Jolie, to wearing baseball hats when appearing at sites of American tragedy. And in my opinion, she has tried to mimic Julia Roberts on several occasions. So where is the true identity? Where does the act end and Meghan's true personality begin? The article begins, for many people, Meghan Markle's public persona can be divided into two halves. There is Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, who married Prince Harry in a fairy tale ceremony at Windsor Castle, and then there's Rachel Zane, the driven and highly ambitious paralegal whom Meghan portrayed in the hit series Suits for 7 seasons. But according to a royal author, Meghan, 44, struggled to separate herself from her role and took criticism for her character as a personal attack. If someone has strong narcissistic traits, their image is their identity. So a role that brings praise becomes part of the self. When the character is criticized, it feels like oxygen getting cut off. And when you add in this more malignant flavor, this thread of negative commentary can trigger blame shifting, counterattacks, and rewriting history. There's never any true reflection. Because the admiration is the fuel, they'll defend the role and themselves at all costs instead of using the feedback to grow. The article continues, speaking of her Suits role, biographer Tom Bauer wrote in his book, Revenge, uppermost in her mind was her image. Convinced that she was on the cusp of international celebrity, she had become preoccupied with Rachel Zane's character. So Meghan, believing that this role is her rocket to global fame, it stops being a job and it becomes the brand. Any criticism or negative feedback about the character lands like an attack. And if momentum stalls, the narrative flips to blame and bigger stunts, anything to keep the celebrity arc alive. And if a bigger role suddenly appears, say becoming a prince's girlfriend, they'll pivot fast. The old brand becomes demoted to a stepping stone, and anything that clashes with the new image is scrubbed or respun. We saw evidence of this just a couple of days ago in one of the YouTube videos I made, where we went through an article that described how Meghan outed her relationship allegedly with Harry at the end of October, and leading up to then, she was changing around her Wikipedia page in preparation for essentially her global launch, in her opinion, of course. The article continues, constantly she absorbed Aaron Korsh's vision for Zane, the feisty opportunist with extraordinary manipulative skills. To her delight, Korsh inserted her own personal interests into the script. Zane became a foodie. He also agreed to limit the number of love scenes with her dressed in just a bra. And this is where we start seeing the enmeshment. It's getting harder and harder to discern where Meghan ends and Rachel begins. And this thing about having less bra-only love scenes, that's not prudishness, but protecting a curated persona and the supply that comes with it. The article continues, anything critical alarmed Meghan. Trawling the internet, she read that a handful of viewers had protested that Zane was about to start an affair. She was alarmed that she, Meghan Markle, was personally blamed. This trawling the internet part reminds me of how it was described in Revenge when Harry and Meghan were in Australia, and they spent the evening scrolling through social media looking at all the negative comments about themselves. I don't know if Harry had this behavior before, but clearly Meghan did. This also demonstrates Meghan's own confidence. If she will not accept roles or characters that are not squeaky clean, she's very limited in her acting prospects. Essentially, she needs to be all the positive adjectives you can think of. That's why we perceive her as so inauthentic, because we see that it's a role. She's trying to look perfect, but nobody's perfect. The article continues, her own reputation, she feared, was threatened by her portrayal in Suits as an unfaithful woman. Worried about potential backlash, she besieged Korsh to end that storyline and the affair. Korsh agreed, aware that he was not only writing a good story, but also Meghan's real-life character and personality. This is just further evidence of the enmeshment between Meghan and Rachel Zane. The article continues, absorbing Korsh's interpretation of loyalty and power play, Meghan was pleased to be cast in what she saw as her true colors, the compassionate mold he was creating. In that new image, Meghan placed her status above reality. This is all we'll cover from this article. It does continue on, but I think there's so much to discuss here. We see that the character has become her costume, and the costume has become the brand. Optics outrank reality, and anything that could dent or tarnish the compassionate mold is edited out or is respun. That's why Meghan's story feels managed rather than lived. It's all curated to protect status. And once status is the North Star, the narrative stops breathing. I want to close this video out with two things I noticed from this article. The first is narrative control. To be honest, I hadn't realized how important this was to narcissists until I started this channel. For people with strong narcissistic traits, controlling the story is controlling the self. Admiration, access, and status all flow through the image. If they don't author the narrative, they risk shame, loss of supply, and worst of all, someone else defining who they are. The top 3 reasons that this happened is ego protection and shame avoidance. Criticism feels like a threat to identity. Owning the story blocks narcissistic injury and keeps the self-concept intact. Their supply and status management, attention, praise, and opportunities depend on reputation. Steering the narrative safeguards the supply. And finally, there's power and accountability control. If they set the frame, they set the rules, minimizing blame, rewriting motives, and keeping others one step behind. And the top 3 ways that this shows up is pre-frame and then reframe. So they tell their version first, redefine terms after the fact, move goalposts, or use DARVO, which stands for Deny, Attack, Reverse Victim Offender, when confronted. They gatekeep optics. They curate access, who asks the questions, who's in the shot. They push edits. They seed selective leaks, and they steer headlines to fit the persona. And finally, they triangulate and smear. They elevate compliant allies, who they call truth tellers. And they discredit dissenters as jealous and bad people. They mobilize their fans to enforce the preferred storyline. This is very much like when we talk about flying monkeys, and I think we can pretty much say that the Sussex Squad, they are flying monkeys. In the movie Wizard of Oz, I believe it's the Wicked Witch of the West who sends out the flying monkeys to do her bidding. Narcissists do similar things. They send out people to do their work, and then when confronted, they can say they had nothing to do with it because it was the flying monkeys that carried out the actions. And the other thing I wanted to talk about is role enmeshment. This is when someone merges with an admired person, so that person's image becomes their self. There's no clean line between the person and the character they're emulating. And here are the top 3 reasons why it happens. There's an identity gap. A shaky core self grabs the other person as a mirror. Their praise, style, and status become the definition. Their supply and status by association. Proximity to the admired person brings attention, access, and clout, and fusion keeps that stable. This reminds me immediately of Meghan and her cosplaying of Princess Diana. Anytime this association brings about positive press, Meghan loves that. Finally, there's a need for control and to prevent abandonment anxiety. Enmeshment reduces the risk that the admired person will leave. If they're one unit, it's safer. The top 3 ways this shows up, you'll see, is very similar to controlling the narrative. In narrative control, it's for the crowd, it's for the public, whereas in role enmeshment, it's for the relationship and protecting the us brand. So there's story steering. They script the relationship. They speak for both, saying things like, we decided. They rewrite history and recast criticisms as an attack on the relationship. For example, if anyone says anything negative about Meghan, it's not an attack on Meghan, it's an attack on Meghan and Harry. Again, there's gatekeeping optics. There's micromanagement of clothes, photos, angles, who's in the shot, and what's shared on social media. Everything must fit the couple brand. And finally, there's boundary erosion. Phrases, hobbies, and values become joint, and there's great threat when the enmeshed person starts seeking independence and freedom. Enmeshment is identity by proxy. If someone becomes enmeshed with you, your life becomes the costume for their image. I'm curious to know, what do you all think of this? Have you ever felt enmeshment with someone? If you feel comfortable sharing, please drop it in the comments. If this was interesting to you, please like and subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you'll know every time I drop a new video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and you're looking for a meaningful way to support something beyond the screen, I'd love for you to consider making a donation to the National Domestic Violence Hotline in lieu of super chats and super stickers. They provide 24/7 support and resources for people in unsafe or overwhelming situations, whether that's emotional, physical, or just hard to name. Their information is on the screen should you need to contact them, and you'll find the link to donate in the description of this video. Every little bit helps, and it means a lot. Thank you again for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.